The relay buoy at the edge of the threshold system had been broadcasting the same 17-second message for 400 years, and Coordinator Selvraith had never once heard it stop. It stopped now. He leaned toward the console, his 3 eyes contracting to slits, and listened to the silence where the human surrender signal used to be. Not static, not a malfunction. Silence, deliberate and clean, the way a held breath is different from an empty lung. The buoy still had power. It simply had nothing left to say. "Play it again," he said. "There is nothing to play, Coordinator." The technician's voice wavered. The loop terminated. Midword. Midword. Selvraith turned that over slowly. A machine does not stop midword. A machine finishes its cycle, because a machine has no opinion about where a sentence should end. Only something that chose to stop stops in the middle of a syllable. "When?" he asked. 11 minutes ago. And Coordinator, the technician hesitated, and Selvraith would remember that hesitation for the rest of his life, would replay it in the dark behind his eyes when he tried and failed to sleep. The last word it managed, before it cut, it wasn't part of the surrender text. What was it? Enough. Just enough. The threshold accord had been the great mercy of the Concorde's history, and every schoolchild across the 9 dominant species learned it the same way. 200 years ago, humanity had emerged from its little blue system loud and reckless and doomed, and the Concorde had done to them what the Concorde did to all species that could not be reasoned with. It had drawn a line around their volume of space, throttled their access to the jump lanes, and waited. Contained species either matured or extinguished themselves. Humanity, the record said, had chosen surrender. They had signed the accord. They had accepted the buoy. They had gone quiet. For 2 centuries, quiet. That was the first thing that did not fit, and Selvraith had spent his career pretending he did not notice it. A species that surrenders decays. It turns inward, it fragments, it forgets it was ever proud. The Concorde's own history was littered with such species, gentled into irrelevance. But every survey drone that drifted past the human cordon returned the same anomaly, filed and ignored by committees who did not want to look at it. The lights on the human worlds were not dimming. They were not brightening either. They were holding, perfectly steady year after year, like the flame of a lamp in a room with no wind, and no one could explain who was tending it, or why a defeated people would keep the lamp lit at all. The second thing that did not fit arrived on his desk the next morning, and it was worse. "The surrender signal," said analyst Corinyu, who was of the Veil and therefore incapable of the emotional coloration Selvraith's own species used to soften bad news, "was never a surrender signal." "Explain." "We translated it 200 years ago. 17 seconds. We rendered it as, we accept the terms. We will hold. We will wait." Corinyu's mandibles clicked. A veil tell that Selvraith had learned meant the creature was frightened and did not have the vocabulary to admit it. "I ran it through the modern lexical models last night. The old translators made an error. A tense error." "A tense error," Selvraith repeated. "The humans were not describing a state. They were describing an intention. The correct rendering is not, we will wait." Corinyu turned the display toward him, and the alien words sat there, patient, terrible. "It is, we will wait until." "Until what?" The sentence was never finished. That is why it looped for 400 years. It was not a statement of defeat, Coordinator. It was the first half of a threat, and the buoy has been holding the pause between the clauses for 200 years. The Veil's mandibles clicked again, faster now. "And last night it finished the sentence. Enough." Selvraith sat very still. Somewhere below him, in the great orbital ring of Concorde Central, 10 billion citizens went about their morning believing they lived in a settled galaxy. "Where is the nearest human vessel to the cordon?" he asked. "There are no human vessels near the cordon. There never are. That is what makes them a model containment case." Corinyu paused. "That was the assessment as of yesterday. And today?" The Veil did not answer, and its silence was its own kind of report. They found the first ship 6 hours later, and the finding of it is the part Selvraith would never be able to make anyone believe who had not seen the sensor logs themselves. It was not detected approaching. That was the impossibility the technicians kept circling, arguing, refusing. Every vessel in the galaxy announced itself long before arrival. The drive wake, the gravitic shadow, the heat bloom of a ship shedding velocity. There were laws of physics about it. You could not move a mass through space without the universe telling everyone you were coming. It was as fundamental as the fact that a body casts a shadow. The human ship cast no shadow because the human ship was not slowing down. "It's going to overshoot," the tracking officer said, relief cracking her voice. "It can't stop in time. It's going to sail straight past the picket and out the other." The ship stopped. It did not decelerate. Selvraith watched the numbers, and there was no deceleration curve, no gradual bleed of velocity, nothing the drive of any known species could produce. The vessel went from a speed that should have smeared it across 3 light seconds of vacuum to a dead, motionless hang, and it did so in the space between 2 sensor pulses, and everyone in the room understood at once, in the wordless animal part of the brain that predates language, that they were looking at something that had decided the laws they lived by were negotiable. "What did that to it?" someone whispered. "What kind of engine?" "Not the engine," Corinu said quietly. "Look at the hull integrity readings. Look at what it cost." Selvraith looked. The ship had survived the maneuver. Barely. Its structural telemetry read like the medical chart of something that had been broken and had chosen, out of sheer refusal, not to die of it. Whatever the humans had done to stop that ship on a coin's edge, they had done it by accepting damage that any rational engineer would have called suicide, and they had done it on purpose because stopping there, right there, at the edge of the cordon, in full view of the picket, mattered more to them than the ship's survival. "They wanted us to see," Selvraith said slowly. "They could have arrived quietly. They chose to arrive like that, like a fist through a wall. As a message. A message saying what? He did not know. That was the horror of it, that he was the ranking mind on the most important morning of Concord's history, and the humans were speaking in a grammar he had never been taught, where the words were ships and the syntax was self-inflicted wounds. Then the human vessel opened a channel, and a voice came through, and it was so calm and so ordinary and so tired that it frightened him more than any of it. "This is the ferryman," the voice said, in flawless Concord trade tongue. A woman's voice. Human. Requesting to speak with whoever is in charge of the thing you built around us. Selvraith keyed the channel himself, overriding protocol, overriding the 6 officers whose job it was to prevent exactly that. "This is Coordinator Selvraith of the Concord. Identify yourself. My name is Mara Voss." A breath. "I'm going to tell you what's about to happen, Coordinator, because someone should have told us 200 years ago, and nobody did. It only seems fair. You are one ship," he said. "One damaged ship against a picket of 40. Whatever you believe you." "I'm not one ship," Mara Voss said. "I'm the one that came to talk. That's a different thing." And then, gently, the way you correct a child who has made an understandable mistake. "You should look at the dark side of your own moon, Coordinator. The one you never bothered to watch. We've been there for a while." He gave the order before he finished processing why. "Turn the survey array. Look at the far face of Threshold's largest moon, the tidally locked hemisphere that faced away from every shipping lane, the blind spot in a surveillance net designed by people who assumed no one would ever be patient enough to hide in it for years." The array turned. The image resolved. Selvraith stopped breathing. There were ships in the shadow of the moon. Not 40. Not 400. He could not count them, because the counting algorithm kept failing, kept returning errors, kept insisting there was no way that many hulls could be sitting cold and silent and undetected inside his own defensive perimeter. They were dark. Every one of them was dark, engines cold, weapons cold, waiting in the lightless quiet with the discipline of a species that had spent 200 years learning to hold its breath. They had crossed the cordon. All of them. Somehow, over years, one silent hull at a time, they had crept through a blockade the Concorde believed was perfect, and they had assembled a fleet in the one place no one was looking, and they had waited, not for the moment they could win, Selvraith understood with a lurch, but for the moment they could be seen. Mara Voss's single battered ship had not come to fight. It had come to make the Concorde turn its head, so that the Concorde would finally look at what had been standing behind it the whole time. "You've been inside our line," he said into the channel, and he could not keep his voice level, and he did not try. "How long?" "Long enough," Maravos said. "You want to know the part that'll keep you up at night, Coordinator? We didn't sneak in last year. The first ship crossed your cordon 108 years ago. It's been sitting in that shadow, crew rotating out generation by generation, for 108 years. Waiting. Their grandparents started the wait. They finished it. The pause. You built a wall around a people who decided the wall was just a place to lean the ladder." Corinu made a sound Selvraith had never heard a Vale make. "Why?" Selvraith demanded. "You had 2 centuries. You could have grown. Traded. Joined the Concorde as a mature species. Why spend 100 years hiding fleets in shadows instead of simply living?" "Because you didn't contain us to protect the galaxy from us," Maravos said, and for the first time the calm thinned, and underneath it he heard something old and hard and grieving. "You contained us because a species that won't stop scares you. And you were right to be scared. But you made one mistake in the math, and it's the same mistake everyone makes, and I'm going to say it slowly so it's on the record forever." She let the silence stretch. "You assumed that if we couldn't win, we'd stop. That is not arrogance," Selvraith said. "That is reason. That is the foundation of every civilization that has ever survived. You weigh the cost against the prize, and when the cost exceeds—" "I know," she said softly. "I know it is. That's what makes you people, and it's a good thing to be. I mean that the galaxy is better for the ones who know when to fold. A breath. We're just not those people. We never learned that particular kind of wisdom. We tried. It didn't take." He should have given the order to fire. Later, in the years of inquiry, they would ask him again and again why he did not give the order to fire while the human fleet was still cold. And the honest answer, the one he never spoke aloud, was that he had understood in that moment that firing would not have ended anything. It would only have told the humans the conversation was over, and he was terrified of what these people did when the talking stopped. "What do you want?" he said. It was not a question anymore. It was surrender of a kind, though neither of them named it. "The cordon comes down," Maravos said. "Not for us. It's already down for us. We proved that. It comes down because as long as it's up, it's a lie you tell yourselves, that you can put a fence around a thing like us and sleep soundly. You can't. You never could. Take down the fence, and we'll come out and be neighbors, and it'll be uncomfortable and loud and you'll hate half of what we do. Or leave it up, and know that we can cross it whenever we choose, and that one day, some year, some grievance, we might choose to cross it cold. And if we refuse?" The channel was quiet for long enough that he thought she had cut it. "Watch the shadow of the moon," Maravos said. The fleet lit up. Not all at once. That was the thing that broke the officers around him, that turned trained professionals into people gripping their consoles with white knuckles. The human ships came alive in a slow, rolling wave across the dark hemisphere of the moon, one drive core kindling after another, 100 cold hulls becoming 100 burning ones, and the light of it climbed across the lunar shadow like a sunrise that someone had built out of engines. Where there had been an empty blind spot in the sensor net, there was now a wall of human fire, silent and patient and vast, and every single one of those ships had been sitting there, powered down, close enough to touch, for longer than most of the officers in the room had been alive. "Stand down," Selvraith heard himself say to the picket. "All vessels, stand down. Do not provoke them." But the strangest part, the part that Corinu flagged, the part that would define everything that came after, was that the human fleet did not advance. It lit up. It showed itself. And then it held. "They're not attacking," Corinu whispered. "Coordinator, they have us. They are inside our formation. They could gut the picket in one pass, and they're just sitting there, burning. Why?" "Because it was never about the attack," Selvraith said, and the understanding arrived in him like cold water. "Maravos, are you there?" "I'm here. You could destroy this picket. Right now. You have the position. You have the numbers. You have surprise. And you are not doing it." He leaned into the console. "You did all of this, 108 years, Generations of your people living and dying in the dark, ships crossing a blockade one at a time across a century. You did all of that, and now that you have the advantage, you are choosing not to use it. I don't understand. Help me understand. Because if we fire first, Maravas said, then we're the thing you always said we were, and every species in your Concord gets to sleep soundly again, telling themselves the monster finally showed its face and now they know what it is. The pause. But if we just light up and wait and don't fire. Her voice was very gentle. Then you have to live with a fleet you can't beat, sitting in your own sky, that chose not to kill you. Forever. And you'll never understand why. And it'll keep you awake. Which is exactly what you did to us. Selvraith closed all three of his eyes. You want us to feel what it is to be contained, he said, by something you cannot fight and cannot comprehend. I want you to feel it for one afternoon, Maravas said. We felt it for 200 years. Consider it a small down payment on understanding your neighbors. There is a moment in the histories that were later written of that day that the Concord scholars still argue about, and it is not the lighting of the fleet, and it is not the terror of the picket. It is what Maravas did next, because it was the moment the galaxy's understanding of humanity inverted completely, the moment every prior assumption turned inside out and showed its lining. She opened a second channel, a wide one. Every ship in the system, every listening post, every relay for 6 jumps in any direction, she broadcast to all of them at once, on every frequency the Concord used, so that there could be no editing later, no official version, no comfortable lie. And what she broadcast was not a demand. It was a list of names. These are our dead, Maravas said, and she began to read. Ilsa Voss, who crossed the cordon in the 41st year and never saw the far side of it. Tomas Reyes, born in the shadow of your moon, died in the shadow of your moon, who never once stood under an open sky. Annika Voss. Jonah Reyes. Sarah. Her voice caught, and she did not hide it, and she kept reading. Name after name after name, and it became clear that she was not reading a battle roster. She was reading a genealogy. She was reading the people who had spent their whole lives in the dark behind the moon, born and raised and grown old and died in cold ships, tending the long patience of a plan they would not live to see completed, so that their grandchildren could light up the void for one afternoon and make a point about wisdom. She read for 11 minutes. The picket did not fire. No one in the whole system said a word. And Selvraith understood, finally, the thing the Concord had gotten wrong for 200 years. The arithmetic error at the root of every containment they had ever performed. They had believed that suffering was a cost, and that any rational creature, faced with enough of it, would stop. That was the load-bearing assumption beneath every wall they built. But the humans did not experience suffering as a cost. They experienced it as an investment. Every name on that list was not a price paid. It was a stone laid in a foundation, and the humans would keep laying stones across generations, across centuries, across any span of time at all, because to them the cost was never the reason to stop. It was the reason to keep going. It was proof the thing mattered. You could not deter a people who metabolized their own grief into resolve. You could only wait for them to decide on their own that the point had been made. Selvraith, Maravas said when the last name was read. Do you know why the buoy said, enough? No. Because for 200 years, every single person who died behind that moon died believing the wait would be worth it. And the ones who were left finally decided it was true. That we'd waited long enough to be believed. That we didn't have to bury one more generation in the dark to prove a point you should have understood the first day. Her voice was raw now, stripped down to the bone of it. Enough wasn't a threat, coordinator. It was mercy. It was us deciding to stop before we became the thing you feared. That's the last thing we had left to prove, not that we could destroy you. That we could choose not to, and stop, when every reason we'd built for 100 years said don't. The cordon came down 11 days later. Not because the Concord voted to lower it. The vote came months afterward, a formality, a signature on a decision that had already been made in the sky over threshold. It came down because Selvraith stood before the assembled coordinators of 9 species and played them the 11 minutes of names, and when it was done he said one thing, and it was the sentence that ended the age of containment. "We built a wall to make them stop," he said, "and they used it to teach their children how to wait. We have not been holding them in. We have been forging them. For 200 years, we have been forging them, and we called it peace. There were those who wanted to fight anyway. There always are." A faction of the Concord's warlords argued, reasonably, sensibly, with all the cold good sense that had built a stable galaxy, that a fleet which could cross any blockade was a fleet that must be destroyed while it could still be caught. And Selvraith let them make their case, and then he asked them one question, the question that had rearranged the inside of his own skull, and he watched it do the same to theirs. "How many of their dead," he asked, "are you prepared to make? Because that is the only currency they answer to. And they have proven they will spend it forever, and we have proven we will not. Tell me the number of human graves at which they surrender. Tell me the quantity of suffering that makes them stop." He looked around the chamber. "You cannot. There is no such number. We have spent 2 centuries searching for it, and the search is what made them what they are." No one answered. Mara Voss did not become an ambassador. She had never wanted to be one, and when the Concorde offered her the role, out of a desperate instinct to put a familiar shape on the unfamiliar thing that had walked out of the dark, she declined, and asked instead to go home. "I've been in the shadow of that moon for 31 years, she told Selvraith, in the one private conversation they had, aboard his flagship, with the human fleet burning steady in the viewport behind her. "I was born there. My grandmother read me those names as a lullaby. Every night. So I'd know them. So I'd never think the wait was cheap." She looked at the viewport, at the light of 100 ships that had cost 108 years to place. "I've never stood on a planet, Coordinator. I've never felt weather. I would like to feel weather before I die." "You gave your whole life to this," he said. "To an afternoon. To a point." "Yes. Was it worth it?" "Truly." Mara Voss was quiet for a while, watching the fleet. "Ask me something first," she said. "When you looked at the shadow of the moon and saw our ships, before you knew we wouldn't fire, what did you feel?" He considered lying. He did not. "Terror," he said. "Absolute terror. The kind I had never felt. The kind I will feel until I die." "Then it was worth it," Mara Voss said softly. "Because now you'll never build another wall. None of you will. You'll spend the next 1,000 years remembering what it felt like to look up and see a people you couldn't stop, and couldn't understand, choose to let you live." She turned from the viewport. "That's what my grandmother died for. Not to win. To be, finally, correctly understood. And I got to be the one who was there when it happened." A small, exhausted smile. "That's more than most people get. That's more than all those names got. I don't get to say it wasn't worth it. It'd be an insult to every one of them." She went home. Or as near to home as she had ever known. She was given a world, a green one, at the edge of what had been the cordon and was now simply a border like any other, and it is recorded that she stood in the first rain of her life and wept, and that she was 52 years old, and that it was the first weather she had ever felt. The galaxy changed after Threshold, in the slow way that galaxies change, which is to say completely and without anyone quite being able to point to the moment it happened. The other contained species, and there were many quiet species behind quiet cordons, gentled into irrelevance across 10,000 years of Concorde policy, were released one after another, because no one could any longer look at a wall around a people without wondering what it was forging in the dark. The age of containment ended not with a war but with a fear, a single specific fear that entered the Concorde's bloodstream that afternoon over Threshold and never left it. But the thing they remembered, the thing that got taught, that got written into the founding texts of the reformed Concorde, that Vale parents told their children and Coordinator Selvraith's own descendants recited at his memorial when he finally died, old and honored, 200 years later, was not the fleet. It was the 11 minutes of names. Because any species can build ships. Any species can cross a blockade if it is clever enough. The Concorde had seen 1,000 clever species and contained most of them without difficulty. What the Concorde had never seen, what it had no defense against and no category for, was a people who would sit in the dark for 108 years, dying one generation at a time, tending a fire they would never be warmed by, so that their grandchildren's grandchildren could make a single point about the nature of patience, and then, at the very edge of victory, with the enemy's throat under their hand, choose to stop. Not because they had to, because they decided the point was made. Selvraith wrote, near the end of his long life, in the private journals that were published after his death, "I have spent 200 years trying to explain to my own people what I understood in that hour over threshold, and I have never found the words, so I will set down the closest I have come, and let those who follow me do better." We believed humanity was dangerous because it would not stop. We were wrong. Humanity is dangerous because it does not experience stopping and continuing as we do. For us, to continue is a decision we make when the cost is bearable. For them, to stop is a decision they make when the meaning is complete. These are not the same axis. We measured them on the wrong one for 2 centuries, and every measurement told us they were losing, right up until the sky filled with their fire. They were never losing. They were counting. And when the count was finished, they lit up the void, and they let us live, and in letting us live they told us the only truth about themselves that mattered, that they had never needed to win. They had only needed to outlast the possibility of surrender. And having outlasted it, having proven across 5 generations in the dark that there was no wall high enough and no grief heavy enough to make them fold, they folded the wall themselves, gently, the way you close the eyes of the dead. I have feared many things in my life. I have never again feared anything the way I feared the mercy of a species that had earned the right to be merciless, and chose, instead, to go home and feel the rain. They never found the number. That is the thing the galaxy carries now, in the quiet under all its treaties and its trade and its long, uneasy peace. Somewhere out there is a people who will wait a century in the dark, who will read their dead to you as a lullaby, who will cross any wall you build not to break it but to prove it was never a wall at all, and who will hold their fire at the last instant, not because they are gentle, but because they have already decided, long before you were afraid, exactly how much they were willing to lose. And the terrible thing, the thing that keeps the coordinators of 9 species awake 200 years later, is not that the humans lit up the void. It is that they turned the lights back off, and went home, and could do it all again tomorrow, and never once told anyone what the count was for.